Hello. This is my day 14 after my symptoms started. So, um, yes, I'm still having symptoms, but they are much improved. And I wanted to share on this video about exposure because something that I ran across when I spoke with my employee health at work is something that is unfortunately very common amongst many different fields in most states, not just in healthcare. Due to, and I'm just going to lay it out there, due to staffing crises that are going on right now, because people are scared to go back to work, people are just still not returning to the workforce in mass like everyone is hoping for the economy and so forth. The requirements to be working health wise are not what is in the best interest of everyone's health. It may be in the best interest economically, trying to weigh risks versus benefits. But again, this is part of what is continuing this to run rampant and to be frustratingly prevalent in every health, not just health care, but in every line of work and every business. There's been a lot of people just don't really know what protocols to follow. What does exposure mean? What do I need to do when I'm exposed? I've been vaccinated. Aren't I safe? So, first of all, let me tell you, most employers are going off of the exact definition of an acute, excuse me, an acute exposure. And that it means within 6 feet for more than 10 minutes without any masks being used. That, to be frank, is not the end all be all of exposure. That is simply put the worst level of exposure that you can have, because that is the most concentrated exposure. I'm living proof, and so are my coworkers, that does not need to be met. Acute exposure does not need to be met or experienced in order to get COVID. And it was always that case. People would say, oh, well, I wasn't within 6 feet ever of the person, but we were together for a couple hours. There are different aspects of exposure, of any level of exposure, that if one of them isn't met, another one being overly met can compound the risk of you becoming positive and contracting the virus. So in my circumstances, when I spoke with my employee health, they just automatically off the bat, they said, so you weren't wearing a mask? Anyone who knows me, including every single one of my coworkers who have never seen my face because I'm always wearing a mask, said, I automatically responded with, absolutely not. Because frankly, that was offensive to me, because I know the safety protocols and I follow them always, and have always, and will continue to do so. But this is a classic case of you doing everything right and someone else doing everything wrong, and you still suffering for it. So, again, I think that I mentioned this in one of my first couple videos. I was wearing a mask the entire time. It was a surgical mask, so it was not an N95, the most protective type. However, I was never within 6 feet of this staff for more than 5 minutes at a time. And I regularly wash my hands. Again, I never remove my mask. But she was unmasked for the majority of the time. And the working conditions are we're more than 6 feet away. We're in our different cubicles in one enclosed room. There is no circulation. We were in there together for hours. So just because I had my mask on and at any rate, because I didn't, in the opinion of the employee health line, because I didn't meet the requirements of an acute exposure, that equates to I wasn't exposed. That is incorrect. Again, this is a classic case of any type of exposure putting you at risk to contract the virus. So at any rate, and I suppose the other just glaring fact that is an incorrect deduction to make is because at least 3 other members of the same office became positive the same weekend or same week. So, and none of us do things outside of the workplace, all together. So there was no other opportunity for us all to get the virus. Pardon me. There are 2 main reasons why employers will only use the acute exposure definition. One is liability. It is so that they essentially don't have to take the blame, essentially, when it comes down to it. The second thing is there needs to be a mechanism or protocol in effect that doesn't blatantly expose others when you have those people returning to work. So different employers will do different things. And I can tell you this from firsthand experience with speaking with hundreds of employers, probably thousands of employers through my time with the triage hotline. I'm sorry, I'm extra phlegmy today again. Anyway, so there are some employers, I'm going to tell you the full spectrum. On one end, there are some employers who know that you're positive and still want you at work. That is insane to me. I don't understand why. Luckily, that's not my employer, but it still happens. So sadly, there are those employers. And then there are those employers who require 2 negative tests before you even return to work. That being said, when all you had was exposure, but you never became positive, that is understandable as long as they're timed properly and they are accurate tests that are also done in the correct method, meaning a staff does them, not a self-administered test. With that being said, if you test positive, you very well could test positive for sometimes up to another 3 months. While that is extremely unlikely to have that, it has happened and it will happen again. So the point is, there is a huge spectrum that employers lie upon. And again, to be frank, some of that lack of consistency is feeding the continuation of this spreading. There needs to be, I mean, I wouldn't say in the middle. I would say closer to the more conservative side if we are strictly going for keeping everybody safe from this. But being concerned about the economy and so forth, that's another aspect that unfortunately doesn't allow for us to only be concerned with the safety of people. There has to be the financial stability of the country, but I mean, personally, I feel as though if we were to just address this once and for all in the manners in which we can and we should, we would be in a much better spot than we currently are, or that we ever were. It just, the problem is, we'll never be able to do that because people refuse to work towards the same goal in this. And that's as far as I'm going to go into addressing the pandemic. But in essence, if you come into contact with a person and any of those protocols in the definition of exposure are met, you have had an exposure. It just might not be an acute exposure. It may not be what they would consider a highly risky exposure. So there are so many different situations that I can't go through all of them, but essentially, if you come into contact with someone who you know is positive, you should, that warrants some caution, not only with how you then interact with people for the next couple of weeks, but also potential testing. Again, everyone has different levels of immunocompromisation. That's not even a word, but you're welcome. I just made it up into one. They have different levels of exposure, and sorry, my brain still isn't working as I wish that it would be. And long story short, you just don't know what everyone else is dealing with in their life. The levels of stress that someone is under can make them immunocompromised, even if they don't have any like autoimmune issues or chronic issues that would normally make you immunocompromised. You don't have to be going through chemotherapy or have an autoimmune disorder to be immunocompromised. We're pretty much all stressed, so we're pretty much all immunocompromised, just to different levels. And the things that I find to be the most helpful in making sure that you can react appropriately to an exposure of any level is knowing as much detail as possible and knowing it as quickly as possible. Having the information in a timely fashion can prevent people from contracting this virus. Because I knew the day of exposure, and it was the same one, I was able to then appropriately react and quarantine myself from my house, so that my family and my animals didn't come into danger. If I wouldn't have found out, if I wouldn't have been notified until the next week, I would have been introducing that virus to everyone that I came into contact with, because I don't wear my mask at home. Um, because we follow the same guidelines. We don't go to restaurants. We mask up whenever we're anywhere outside of the home. So, and although we have become more lax with some family members, overall, um, we follow the exact same guidelines as each other. So we're on the same page. So we're not endangering one another. With that being said, again, if I wouldn't have known of my exposure that I had, which again wasn't an acute exposure according to the definition, I I would have exposed others, and there would have been other people sick. It's a fact because I came down with it badly. Um, the symptoms that I mentioned in one of my first couple videos, those were the symptoms that I had up to that point. I definitely experienced an additional 5 to 7 new ones after that point. And it's just not fun. And I want to make sure that just because your employer or your parent or your significant other or your best friend or whoever you trust may be telling you, oh, you don't have anything to worry about, you can't go off of someone else's word unless they know the exact situation and they truly are educated in the matter of cross-contamination and viral transmission and things like that. Just because someone can regurgitate information to you does not mean that it's true. So I would recommend, yeah, I would wait until after the 11th of this month, but you can call the COVID triage hotline at 260-435-5050, and you'll talk to me. It will be a voicemail, but I will respond within hopefully 24 business hours, depending upon the call load and so forth. So, but I'm fully versed on COVID, and I only have everyone's safety at heart, and that is my only goal. I will not necessarily be giving you answers that you want to hear, but but they will be based in science. They will be based in safety for you, your loved ones, your coworkers, yourself. My goal is not to keep the economy running. My goal is not to, make sure that people around you are comfortable with the situation. My job is to keep people safe. Now, while that does primarily mean physically, I also want to make sure that, your emotions are kept in mind. And also, I certainly don't want you to lose your job. Nothing that I tell you can outweigh what your employer tells you. Your employer might tell you, hey, you were exposed, but you're not having symptoms, you have to come to work. That is then up to you. I cannot tell you that you can't go to work, but I can tell you the things that you should do in the meantime and how you can do so in the safest manner possible to keep the risk of further transmission down. So I'm there to help, and I'd be glad to do so if you have any questions. So anyway, those are the differences of exposure, and like I said, unfortunately, acute exposure is what most employers and most people in general are basing their safety protocols off of. Just realize when it comes to the Delta variants, especially, all bets are off when it comes to exposure. You absolutely do not need an acute exposure to get the Delta variant. Have a wonderful day.